WTF Portland. What we got going on here? What do we got going? I mean, are we just making a statement here that Portland is, hey, what's going on? What happened? No, kinda. But we're going to get into it. WTF Portland is a Twitter site, and the site that I follow is Instagram. And they've got some epic stories, some epic coverage of just daily life in Portland that kind of reflects the down and dirty of what's going on. And sometimes it is down and it is dirty. Let's get into it. Here we go. So I think I've been following WTF Portland now for, I don't know, maybe 6 months, something like that, maybe a year, something like that. They have always got, I mean, here you've got just a photo. It's just some of the pictures that end up on these sites. You're like, okay, that really exemplifies what's going on. But it also, as a parent, as a human being, you got people sleeping on the, basically the sidewalk or the road or whatever. This is just a straight up street, some kind of parking lot. You got people crashed out, whacked out on drugs, and they go to sleep, and you're waking up and just, out in the open in Portland. It's so much of that. And, it's just not right. It's just not right. You shouldn't allow people to live that way. Got that whole free will thing? Yeah. But the way we've let it devolve into this crazy drug culture, and that's literally what all this homelessness is about, right? It's not about that poor family that's trying to get back on their feet. There's a scooch of that out there. But the vast majority of it is people that, they don't want housing. They don't want all this stuff that we're trying to throw at them. We're trying to claim they want. It's just not happening. So WTF Portland, that's the name of a Twitter feed that this author discovered while roaming the feeds. Its sole purpose is to show you what has happened to Portland since its implosion over the past few years. And the reason I'm reading this article is because it goes through kind of a laundry list of here's what you got going on. Here's your sign. It's impossible to convey how bizarre this is. Portland for decades was portrayed as a liberal paradise. It literally was the place that all the advocates of urban planning and diversity is our strength zealots pointed to us as the place where liberalism proved that it truly was better at running things. Remember when that was the claim? Liberalism. Hey, if you go down our pathway, things are going to be great. I mean, it's just this, utopia. So now you've got the utopia that is on a roll down in Portland, on a roll. You got Seattle. Yeah. All right. Utopia. San Fran. San Fran closing stores left and right. LA. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on, right? But those are your excellent West Coast examples of, that might not be so much of a utopia type approach here. Unless your version of utopia is, just not good. When we had our light rail battles here in the Twin Cities, Portland always came up as the city that proved that rail made things better. But as in Portland, light rail has become a crime magnet and the roving home of drug-addled homeless bums. Overdoses are a daily occurrence. I visited Portland to see what worked and what didn't about 25 years ago. It seemed nice enough. My brother-in-law lived in Portland for decades and thought it was paradise until he was forced out by the decline. We talk about that here on News for Reasonable People all the time. Hey, enjoy the decline. All right, thanks. I will. Because I'm podcasting it, right? I am literally in real time podcasting the decline. That is unfortunately, or fortunately in my case, what we're doing. Because I've got podcast material for days. It's insane. But unfortunately, some of that comes at the expense of people ODing, stores moving out, people not being able to get their groceries, not get their medication, impacting a lot of areas of society, right? You got burned out stores, you got areas, you got storefronts that are just, and that's what I focus on a lot is the business side of things. Because business, it's fairly cut and dried. All right. You can't make a profit, you leave. An individual location. It's pretty basic. And most of the time, that's not an issue. But what we're seeing now is the real decline and businesses not being viable in so many of these areas because of the public policies that they've engaged, the liberal utopia that I think a lot of folks on the far left have just, this is the best thing ever. Whereas more moderate people don't have the voice to kind of override, these whack jobs that think this is the greatest thing ever. And then we're watching a city like Portland just go right down the crapper, right? I mean, that's literally what we're doing. It's like, this isn't going to end up well. And it's not. Right now, Portland is shutting down businesses. We're going to talk about one in a second that's opening up, but it's already been vandalized before it's been opened up. So this guy's brother-in-law, he moved across the river to Washington State. Yep. About 45 minutes away from the city and rarely visits anymore. He had resources, so he left the city behind. That is what a lot of folks are doing right now. And a lot of folks in Portland are doing that because Portland has such a tax situation that if you're mid to upper end in Portland, in Oregon and Clackamas County, you're going to pay some taxes, and people are leaving because they're on, tax basis like New York City for people who make over 25 million a year. That's kind of relatively where residents in a certain tax bracket in Portland sit right now. So they're like, okay, we get nothing for our tax dollar, because the city's so inundated with, all this crime and whatnot going on. And they've got a, negative budget like most cities do coming out of the pandemic. The federal money is long since gone and the tax base is dwindling. So, you've got this craziness going on. I forgot to read the article at the beginning here, but we're just going to keep going. That's how we're doing it here. Conservatives now point to Portland as a warning, and we are right to do so. But I don't think most of us grasp how awful the place has become. Well, if you've been following this podcast, I think I've painted a fairly adequate picture of what's going on. And I try and paint it from the standpoint of, documentable things, all right, this happened. So it's not just my opinion of, Portland is a hole, We're not doing that. We're calling out things the way they are, which is, all right, you defunded your police. You don't have enough cops. You got craziness going on. You're letting people sleep wherever they want. You got 900 homeless encampments. That's not an exaggeration. Like 900. You've got a crazy murder rate. You got higher murders than you do in San Francisco. You got less population. I mean, you got people moving out. You've got all of these things that are facts. And like Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings. But Sean, this is how I feel. All right. You're welcome to your feelings. Whatever. It's one thing to read about store closings. The REI that my nephew worked at for a few years is closing, despite being in a Tony part of town. And it's another to actually see what happened to the city. So I premiered at 11 o'clock this morning. I premiered the REI store closing. The last store in Portland Incorporated is closing. You might say, well, who cares? REI is built for a city like Portland. And when Portland says, and when REI corporate says, yeah, not so much. And they didn't even say, they came right out and said it's due to crime and the safety of our employees and management and customers. It's due to safety issues, and they've been broken into so many times. I've heard from so many of you that have reached out and said, I've experienced this happening. We saw this happening. Police officers tell me, yeah, they're broken into this many times. So even though it's in a decent part of town, it's been, it's had its fair share. And somebody recently, I think, drove their car into it. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate, right? Just bash your way into a store, just hell bent for leather, right? Just bash into the store, grab and go. I mean, talk about just straight up destruction. So that's where WTF Portland opened my eyes, the author says. There's some video here. You can take a look at that. Any of these articles are always on my Discord channel, which is Reasonable Plus. You can check that out. We're doing all kinds of stuff there. So if you want to look at that, more than welcome. And at 9:00, Monday through Friday, I am typically at the premiere online. You can message me. You can say whatever you want. You can say, hi, Sean. I love that. Yeah, it's like a half an hour. I'm there. I'm working away on other stuff, but I'm paying attention to what you guys are talking about as well. So we do that Monday through Friday. I'm trying to, it's nice to have interaction instead of, oh, I watched your video. Well, what'd you think? Well, now you can type it out and say, hey, halfway through your video and it sucks. Yeah, you're free to say that. Yeah. Freedom of speech. It's everything, right? The scenes truly are harrowing and put anything you might hear about New York City to shame. That's always my standard of comparison, right? As a kid growing up on the West Coast, you always had, things are way worse in New York City, way over there. And then, you hear about the cleanup and all the stuff that happened there. That to me was kind of like, all right, you've got that urban decay going on. And that's the most recent example I have. Now we're going to have to see how the urban decay in a city like Portland is going to be handled, because it is off the charts to that point where, good friend of mine I spent last night hanging out with, he's like, Sean, his name is Mike. And he was like, Sean, when is the end of all of this kind of going to culminate? And I'm like, Mike, I think it's happening right now. REI leaving Portland. If you need more of a sign than that, I don't know what it is. Because REI, if you're not familiar with REI, maybe you don't have it in your town. It is an outdoor enthusiast's paradise of a store. They got fittings for all kinds of stuff. You can rent gear. You can do all kinds of stuff there. And it's designed for a city like Portland, where you've got rivers, you've got the ocean, you've got mountains, you've got Cascade volcanoes to climb. I mean, you got bikes for days in Portland. Portland is known for its bicycle, human riding, not meh. Although the Portland Antifa versus the Mongol Bike Club brawl, that video, for whatever reason, came back around for me. Did a podcast on that a while ago, and it came back on, and it's gone gangbusters. So what's going on in Portland? Outlaw bike clubs, are they up to something? I don't know. I just, okay. I made $700 last week on that video that I recorded 2 years ago. Take it. So the sheer degradation of a once beautiful city actually makes me very sad. It's one thing to be able to say, I told you so, but it's another to be confronted with the sheer human misery that pervades the city. And that is true. That is true. I mean, we're seeing it. Here's an example that I kind of went back and forth with a man in blue down in Portland. Those 11 overdoses. I think it was Easter weekend, 11 overdoses. 3 of them ended up with people dead. I mean, that's gnarly stuff. Portland overdoses on March 31st. Here's a map. You're just looking at it. I mean, most of them are concentrated in kind of the fentanyl area. And that's been moved around a little bit because Mayor Ted's like, clear that out. Mayor Ted hasn't done much about anything, but he's locking down on the fentanyl a scooch. But those fentanyl dealers, they're just going to move, a few blocks down. I hear it might be Target on Morrison Street, I think it is, something like that. But yeah, I mean, here is literally March 31st. Here are your overdoses in Portland. I mean, that's insanity. I mean, you just got people going off left and right. And yet Portland, like so many other West Coast cities, decided to decriminalize hard drugs. Make it okay. Hey, harm reduction. We understand you're going to use, so we want you to do it in the safest way possible. Oh, the overdose rate has skyrocketed. Okay. Well, now you can't reel it back in, right? You can't reel it back in. That situation is out there. You've created the policy. Going back on that, I mean, you can go back on that and criminalize it. Now you got just a whole bunch of junkies hanging out in Portland and in Seattle. They've created this vacuum for demand, right? Now we've got this massive amounts of supply coming up the I-5 corridor from the southern border. None of this is rocket science. I always jokingly say, even a real estate guy can figure it out, right? People often say, hey, You don't know what you're talking about. No, maybe, but I've read enough stories that, whether or not you believe me or you think that I have what it takes to analyze these things, I've brought you enough data to basically say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing or not doing. The jolt of pleasure one gets from being proven right pales in comparison to the sadness that the reality of having been proven right means that people are living and dying like this. Poverty porn, right? We talk about poverty porn being, hey, let's take some photos of the poor homeless people. Well, in this case, and in the vast majority of cases, it's not poverty, it's drugs. It's not homelessness, it's drugs. It's not lack of housing, affordable housing, it's drugs. So you want to talk about living and dying? They are literally living and dying on the streets of Portland, just like we're talking about here. So whatever you do, whatever the city comes up with as a solution, unless it starts on the front line to get these people into some treatment, get them detoxed, get them, and oftentimes these folks do not want to go down those roads, and you cannot force them by law in Portland. So unless you're going to bump up against this headwind all the time. So until that changes, I don't see, you build more housing. All right. So now you're going to take a bunch of drug addicts and stick them inside. How's that going to work out? How about you ask the Skid Row Housing Authority how that's going, and they are in the process of having 29 hotels, 2,500 hotel rooms taken from their entity, Skid Row Housing Authority, because they are basically bankrupt and all of their buildings are in such disarray that the city is having to take over a housing authority. I mean, and all they did was just, take old buildings, kind of renovate them and stick people in there. And when they stick these drug addicts in there without any, trying to get them sober, they just tear apart those hotel rooms to the point where you don't have enough income to cover the rest of the structure. I've talked about that multiple times. That's what's going to happen. You just stick a bunch of addicts. I mean, it's that whole housing first concept. But the housing first, it should be like 8 or 9, I think, on the list. All right, do this, and then work on the housing. Because treatment is housing. Oh, people do not like it when you say that. Like, no, it's not. Yeah, it is. It's a roof over their head. That's what you're talking about. The city has become lawless, literally. Police are busy administering Narcan to drug addicts and handing out $100 tickets for smoking fentanyl in public. Are they even doing that? Because we're not prosecuting that. Are we? I don't even think we're doing that. In this video above, you see a cop actually feeling sad that an addict has moved on from meth to fentanyl. Because you had a higher chance of dying, right? Higher chance of dying on fentanyl. If you're a parent and, my son's been he passed on just about 2 months ago. And at one point in time, he went through treatment. And before he went through treatment, he was staying with me, and I would walk down the hall and I would go, okay, is this the morning I find my son maybe not with us? So I had enough trips to those down the hall where I was going to wake him up to go to work or whatever he was doing at the time. Not enough of that time where I'm like, why can't he just be doing heroin? When you get to that point as a parent, it kind of really rocks with your emotions. And I've had you guys reach out to me. I've had other parents say, hey, sorry to hear about your son. We're about to lose our daughter. I've had, those kind of comments sent to me, emails. And I'm like, oh God, it's real. And when you think, old school, you're like heroin. That's not where you want to be. And now you're like, all right, with fentanyl out there, okay, let's roll the dice with that heroin, because maybe at least then it doesn't have the fentanyl in it. And now we know that fentanyl is in everything. So whether it's meth or fentanyl or trank, that's the new big one. You're seeing more and more stories on that, right? The xylazine just rots people out from the inside out, and then you got to get limbs amputated. You're going to hear a lot about that. That's just hardcore stuff. Imagine living in a world where your life is better when you only do meth. That's the statement. That is a legit, straight up statement, because if it's just meth, hey, probably not going to die, right? Slowly you are, but you're not going to OD like you might on fentanyl. So, and just those are the kinds of things that you go through as a parent, and you're like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing these street drugs, but you're talking to the choir at that point in time, right? Preaching to the choir. The sheer scale of the disaster is difficult to comprehend. I grew up with Detroit being a hollowed out mess, so I can't get upset when everybody tells me to stay away from even the border of the city. I actually drove to 8 Mile Road once, where the suburbs are on one side of the street and the city on the other, and you could see how civilization turns to savagery in 100 feet. Just such a divide, right? Such a divide. It's like so many of these corporations in Portland that are pulling out of Portland. Walmart, REI, on their way out, they're like, hey, thanks for patroning our store for the last XYZ years. Unfortunately, we no longer will have a presence in Portland, but visit us at our 45 other Walmarts surrounding Portland. And also you can join us on walmart.com, rei.com, just not in actual Portland. So, oh, well, I guess they were right. Avoid Detroit, but Portland is different. Even though it was never my Mecca, I understood why liberals loved it. The vibe was nice enough, if not my thing. People were quirky and happy, and the coffee was nice. It was easy to make fun of, but you did so with a twinge of envy about the nicer parts of the city. That's kind of how it was until a certain point. And then you're like, you know what? That niceness is being overridden by what you got going on here, which is not good. That city is gone, never to return. Portland is a slum. It's a crime-ridden, trash-strewn, drug-infested slum. Honestly, it looks like they should take off and nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. Those are some fighting words. Honestly, it looks like they should take off and nuke it from orbit. Nuke Portland. I mean, if you're a longtime resident of Portland, you're probably like, yeah, that is correct. But hey, let me get out of here first, though, because I want to retire and do my thing. Got a lot of people in that position in Portland right now. People that are hanging on, kind of waiting for things to turn around. Might be a while. And then you've got the libs of TikTok. That's an amazing account. I mean, they show just some funniest things. If you're only on Facebook, I would encourage you to get an Instagram account just because there's so much crap on there that's entertaining. But limit your time on there, right? You don't need to spend all day. But I post stuff to my story on Instagram all the time because there's just so much good content. It's so funny. This morning I posted a video of a dude in Florida. He got really drunk and he grabbed an alligator and he took an alligator into this mini mart store, getting some more booze. Yeah, it didn't go well for him. You can check that out. Sean Reynolds 68 on Instagram. Funny stuff. It's on the story though. That disappears. So keep walking and soon you can hop on Portland's famous light rail line and get a view of the destruction elsewhere in the city. The city looks like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie set, only it is real. Most third world cities aren't this bad, at least not in downtown. And there isn't much to Portland besides the heart of the city. It's not Detroit, San Francisco, LA, or New York. It's of a middling size and simply shouldn't look like this in any rational world. There's not enough room for a bad part of town because it's pretty small and it's geographically isolated. You've got waterways and then, out to the west, you've got basically, not much. And so, it's geographically downtown Portland and the core is really, it's confined. It's confined. So that is not exactly the paradise that we had been promised after the summer of love broke out in 2020. During the Antifa riots, the mayor, who had gone soft on the rioters, finally got fed up and started criticizing them after doing his photo op and hugging Antifa. And we had a bunch of soccer moms down there. Remember that? It's just absolute craziness. They responded exactly as you would expect as he did. They attacked his condo building and he fled like a coward, leaving his neighbors to suffer the wrath of the rioters. Unbelievable. Do you remember when that happened? Mayor Ted got run out of his own condo building. Andy, no, he's covered a lot of the Antifa scene in Portland and he covered that. And he paid a real price for doing that as well. He got his world rocked and, brain injury, and he had all kinds of stuff going on. Nobody did anything. Nobody did anything. Portland police were basically told to stand down, let this go on. Rather than dealing with the protesters in a rational way, the Portland government gave in, apparently believing they had a point about how the prominently white city was oppressing everybody. That is the crazy thing about so many of these stories. Because in Portland, just like in Seattle, vast majority of the population, white. So why do we have all this crazy indignation about, all this oppression and stuff from a bunch of white people? I mean, it's virtue signaling to me, right? It's virtue signaling. And it's like, hey, how about you just take care of your own neighborhood? Figure things out. So it was a chaotic and electric time, one that offered identity to those engaged in the fight, a fight that came to be identified with the city itself and not without crime. Mayor Ted Wheeler had instructed police not to arrest people in the act of protesting. Newly elected District Attorney Mike Schmidt, welcome to the Schmidt Show, declined to prosecute 92% of those who were arrested. So you just had this situation where these dirty protesters just went ham, and here's your end result. This is what Portland's looking like, right? The gun reduction task force was disbanded, and you get record levels of murder rates in 2 years running. Amid claims it targeted communities of color. How's that working out for the communities of color in Portland? Not that great, got to be honest. An activist demanded the police be defunded by $50 million, nearly a quarter of the annual budget. The city council responded by cutting $15 million. Because you know what? I think deep down, these folks knew, hey, you cut the police, it's not going to go well. But, we still wanted to fund the police because the once idyllic city has descended into chaos, and all the happy talk from 2020 has led to this. Rather than affirming the rule of law and the norms of civilization, the leaders of Oregon and Portland decided to cede the city to savages, kind of like Seattle did here with CHOP. And the savages accepted the invitation and moved in to build their version of society. And that's what we've got going on now. And that's what I cover daily, right? It's gotten to the point where getting a decent cup of coffee is becoming difficult, which is something of a religious rite in the Pacific Northwest. When a once popular coffee shop can't survive in downtown Portland, the apocalypse has truly arrived. And that was, I did a podcast on that. KOVA Coffee, I think is how you pronounce it. Yeah, it's not in a great area. And a man in blue said, hey, when they first moved in, I really questioned that location because, it wasn't a great location. They overlooked that whole location thing, right? It's okay. Got cheap rent. This is a deal. We got a cheap rent in here. Now they're moving out. Yeah, they literally, that was a podcast I did just not that long ago. So Portland has had problems with protesters for a long time, but the 2020 George Floyd riots are what broke the city. Currently, Portland has about half the number of police officers. We know all about that. You just don't have enough cops for the city. And then everything just kind of devolved after that George Floyd thing, right? We had what everybody was saying, we've got this utopian society that's going to be the best ever. And the rest of us were kind of looking at it going, I don't think so. This is a train wreck. This is the train wreck that is not going to end up all that well. And that's what it's ended up in, right? It's literally ended up in that. This article goes on to cover a bunch of other stuff that we already know. Yeah, there's somebody doing drugs. But bottom line is you've seen all the stories. And I always say, from Jeff Foxworthy, I think it was Jeff Foxworthy, here's your sign. When you've got kind of an out of control society like this, and you can clearly see that so much of it is based on drug addiction, which leads to homelessness, which leads to, tents being everywhere if you allow them. And then you just kind of, you defund the police, don't have enough cops, all of these things, all of these situations work to end up with where Portland is now, where Seattle in some instances, in some areas is now. San Francisco is now. LA, Skid Row, downtown LA is now. Areas of Chicago are now. Now, the Walmart pulling out of, half of their Walmarts in Chicago, and yet the residents of Chicago still vote in, a progressive mayor. What are you doing there, Chicago? Have you not figured it out? It's kind of like the, politicians and political base in Portland hasn't figured it out. And what I was telling my friend Mike yesterday was, you say what you want about Seattle, but we've got a few reasonable people that are trying to make some more moderate decisions. And so that's why you've got a mayor that understands downtown is your core. Need to get folks back there. Amazon's going to be going back 3 days a week. That's kind of one of the big leaders, but then that's still 40%. You got 3 out of 5 days. So you got 60% of your days covered. You're going to have employees back. It's still a massive amount of days and tax base that's not going to be in downtown anytime soon. So these mayors and these leaders in these West Coast cities, they're going to have to scramble to hold their tax base together because it's all based out of downtown. And those are the areas that have been hit the hardest because during the pandemic, just basically cleared the downtowns out. Everybody could work wherever they wanted for what we thought was going to be forever. That's not happening. May 1st is Amazon. That's a widely kind of known fact. People are not happy about it, but we got to kind of get back to where things were, or that's what people are aiming for. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So Portland, what is it going to take? It's going to take recognition on the part of its citizens that maybe that liberal utopia, maybe that took a hard left turn somewhere there-ish, right? I'm being very kind and I'm not trying to rail on Portland because WTF Portland already does that. So check it out. Check it out on Instagram. Check it out on Twitter. I think they've got Facebook. They're all over. They've got good content. I don't know them personally, but I watch their stuff and I'm like, yep. That sounds about right. They always cover the major topics. So check out WTF Portland, subscribe to my channel, News for Reasonable People, all that good stuff. You know what to do. I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for being here. Bye for now.